To the EFED epilogue. I've done. I did one. I'm kind of new to Twitch, so I did one before I even realized that it didn't record it. So it was just a live stream. So if you didn't catch that one, which most people didn't because it was the first one and nobody knew about it yet, I hadn't even posted it anywhere. So anyway, I'm still getting used to Twitch. I've been more used to YouTube and other media in my career of doing other stuff. So anyway, but today I wanted to hop on the EFED epilogue while I had a few minutes, and I wanted to talk about characters, character building, because that's one of the things that I think gets lost sometimes in the grand scheme of what people mean to convey in RPs and what actually is being said based on the person and their perception of the person judging and reading it. And all your readers, really, it's about building, right? You building characters is one of the most important things that you can do, and where you are in that story is going to really mean everything as far as what's conveyed to the reader. And ultimately, I know a lot of people go, "Oh, well, I just write for me, and I don't care what the reader thinks." But ultimately, you are competing against other people, so I mean, it does matter in a sense as far as winning or losing. Now, in angled feds, obviously, that's less of an issue because it's kind of predetermined, or at least some matches are, even if it's not everything. I know there's a lot of feds that don't say they're angle feds until something actually happens where they don't want somebody to win that won, and then they go, "Oh, well, we're actually an angle fed. We just didn't tell anybody," stuff like that. But that, I think that there's a lot of character work that always needs to be done. Where's your character from? What's their story? How do they get to where they are? Is it from a traumatic past? Is it from an overcoming, challenging story? Think of your favorite movie. Think of a movie like Rocky and all the challenges he had to overcome to get to that first boxing match. And once he got there, really, it just kind of starts the journey where then he has to start going through these heavy competitors and figuring it out. And there's loss along the way as far as his trainer and different things that happen, and then his wife eventually, and all the things that happen in just a Rocky movie, for instance, or the Rocky chain of movies, really the entire series that ultimately determine the journey of the character, right? And you could go in so many different directions. I'm sure Stallone was writing those movies. He thought a lot about the direction that he wanted to go in. There's moments where Rocky's on top. There's moments where he's at the bottom. But ultimately, what makes the entire journey poignant to the point where you're entertained watching it, and he was entertained to write it to make it watchable, is really all those peaks and valleys and how that works together, right? And so you really want to have a good totality of story. It's not always going to be where your guy's the top guy. It's not always going to be where your guy's feeling his greatest at every single moment. I mean, we would all love that, and as make believe, you can write that if you want. It's just a matter of feasibility. And if somebody else is writing more depth and up and down journey that means more to a character, and you're just kind of writing in one direction as far as my guy's always the top guy and he never has a moment. That's his thing, and he's always the top and he never has a doubt. And well, that's not very human as an emotion, right? Like all humans have doubt. All humans have moments in their career that make them overcome them to achieve the things, especially at a high level, like being a world champion in a real wrestling fed, right? So all those things matter as far as the journey that the person goes on and how that all is really conveyed by you through how you write it, how you format it. Is it readable? All these things that matter. Layouts can matter a little bit too, but layouts aren't necessary to convey the story, though. I mean, if you just write and understand how to break paragraphs, don't write one really long thing because then your eyes get stuck and you're blending it all together kind of a little bit. Some people can pull that off depending on how they do it, but it's very few and far between. So you want to have breaks, you want to have paragraphs, you want to have different things happening, and you don't want it to look super steady as she goes. As far as 3 lines of scene, one line of dialogue, 3 lines of scene, one line of dialogue, right? Because it looks kind of contrived. Like the only reason that you're doing it is to write to a certain word limit or something, right? You never want somebody who's reading your piece to think, oh, they're just doing this because of the RP rules, right? Because then it takes them out of the scene, out of the character, and out of the story that you're trying to convey, right? So you always want to kind of differentiate, which takes time and it takes energy and it takes planning and it takes you going, I'm going to, make sure that I do these things in order to be successful in this match, in this fed, or at least put up a good showing, even if I don't have time necessarily to win it, or maybe can't win it against who I'm going against at this moment because they're just at a different point with their character that I can't get to at this moment to beat them, which does happen, and it's frustrating because sometimes it's not just about talent. Sometimes it's also about timing in a fed. When you face someone and where you both are when that happens, and then a few weeks later you may face them again, and it may be a totally different story. So it just really depends on all of those things. And character building is really the number one thing that I think people forget about when they're RPing, because you can have a great RP, but until you introduce a character and people understand where they are, it's not really going to hit the same way as far as potency goes. So you want it to be potent. You want it to have a big slamming effect, right? You want it to be like, oh wow, you want your points to get across, but that all takes time to build into. And the patience of that and the work that you put into that is really ultimately what determines the quality of your piece. And certainly there's ways to work trash talk into story, and there's ways to do all kinds of different things creatively. And it also depends on whether you're heel or face, and what kind of story you're trying to tell determines what goes where and all that kind of stuff. And there's no set rules about how to tell a story or how to convey a message that you're trying to get across. In fact, creativity and trying to do things differently is really good, but it's also hit and miss. So if you try something, that's kind of off the cuff, sometimes you have to understand I'm trying that and it may or may not work, right? I was having a John Cable a couple weeks ago when we were going into Cannabis Cup was talking to me about, hey, I'm trying this, and what do you think of it? And I was like, well, I like what you're trying a lot, as far as that goes, because it's helping to build your character and his character he's had for 20 years or more or something like that, right? Where he knows the character inside and out, and now he's really comfortable trying different things. John Cable's in WGWF for those of you that didn't know that or didn't know who I was talking about. But he's really good, really talented guy. He does a lot of lately he's been doing a lot of the interdimensional um, pieces with Cable, going in different directions against different opponents that are much different, right? And so it becomes things like that become challenging because you have to figure out how to convey the story, especially if you're telling a series of stories, like a part one, a part two, that kind of stuff, and still manipulate them to win each individual style matchup with other people, right? And that's when you see really good RPers thrive, is when they're really hitting on all cylinders. A guy like Cable that's more than capable of winning against anybody. But he can change and manipulate and still tell the story and progress the same story within the same series, but still win against different styles of opponents, right? Because he understands that okay, for this I need this much of this component and not this much of this one. For the next one I need more of that one and not that much of this one, right? And that's really where you get to where you're hitting on all cylinders with a character, is because those are ultimately the things that are going to really push and thrive and stand out, is the fact that you're able to do that against anybody. And then it becomes a moment too where it gets inside, we all say this is fake, right? But it's there's really real competitive aspects to writing in a fed. And one of those things is that if you see somebody else that's winning in a bunch of different ways against other people, it does intimidate you going into a match with them. We can all say whatever we want, no matter how good we are. I feel like I'm a really good writer. There's certain matches I go into and I go, I don't know about this one, because I'm looking at all those things and it does get into your head a little bit where you're going, wow. And that's one of the reasons why, too, I try really hard not to take it too seriously as far as the result and as far as all that stuff, because it can get into your head. Now, there's other factors that go into that too, where feds have to take it just as seriously as we do when we put up the work. They're asking us to do things by a certain time, a certain requirement, and I expect them to do the same thing on their side. And when they're examining the pieces as far as determining outcomes and taking it seriously and all that kind of stuff. But outside of that, I think that ultimately, when you're character building, it becomes really a measure of how far and how much depth you have as a writer to be able to develop things. And I always go back to when I'm kind of out of material or I'm not sure what to do, I'll look at my favorite movie or my favorite show, or watch something new that's going to give me new ideas. I'll go watch V for Vendetta and think, oh wow, how could I do something like that in an RP, without it sounding ridiculous and being just a copy of V for Vendetta, right? I don't want it to be a copy, but I want it to be something similar where it has certain aspects that I want to take and put into a Dubois RP or whatever the case may be, right? So I think that there's a lot of things like that where it's okay to borrow ideas. You don't copy them blatantly, like you don't just do exactly what they did in the movie, but you adapt it to your character and you adapt it to the things that you're doing, and those are good for ideas. It's gonna push you in new creative directions all the time. When you kind of run out of your own maybe gas tank of ideas, it can kind of give you a new fill up to think of creative ideas that are happening in other mediums, whether it be music, or there's a lot of times when I'll throw music on and it ends up being the video that I use in my RP or that I post with my RP, and it gives me a vibe as I'm writing so that I understand like this is what I'm trying to go to, and then it syncs it with the music. Does that necessarily come across in the way that it's judged? Probably not. I don't know that it does, but at the same time it helps me to flow and to stay kind of on track and not get distracted from the point I'm trying to make, because you can, try to go in too many different areas with a character. You can try to do too many things at once, which isn't good either. So you want to be able to really differentiate, this is what I'm trying to do with this RP. This is where I'm at with this character story. This is where I'm at with trying to, trash talk or fuck somebody up. or the world building in general of what I'm trying to do with a character. Maybe it's just an establishment piece where I'm just trying to kind of build a foundation to work up and spring from in a different way later, which is fine. You can do any of those things at any given time. You just have to understand amongst yourself as a writer, where am I in that process? What do I expect out of this match? If I really want to win, do I have to RP more this way or that way? Right? Do I have to RP? So I can't really set up foundational stuff if I'm really trying to win the match. You might be able to. It depends on the situation. Good enough writers maybe can do a little bit of both, but it becomes challenging and it becomes distracting. And sometimes to the reader and to the judge that's looking at your pieces, it can be a little confusing when you're reading it. If you're like, oh, well, they're trying to do this over here, but they're trying to do that over there. But when you start piecing it together, those things start to flow naturally, where you're not thinking about it as much. It's just like anything. It's like when you run a play in basketball or football, right? At first, you're thinking about where do I have to be on this play and all that. And then once you really learn it and you get it down, you're not thinking about that anymore. Now you're just thinking about how to beat the guy across from you because you already know the play and where you're going to go, right? And so that's the same thing that happens with character building, is where you get to a point where you learn the play so much that you're no longer really thinking about where you have to go. Now you're just thinking about, okay, well, as I'm getting there, am I going to be even more successful and take it to that next level? Like a wide receiver beating a cornerback off the line in football, right? Now he already knows the route he's going to run. They've run it a million times in practice. He's run it through all the games this season already. They already understand what that is. The difference is going to be in the execution, and it's going to be in the tactics that you use by which to get that guy off you when he presses you at the line, right? And so those are really the things to think about. I think that help me as far as story building, as far as characters, just in general. That's just a very general dynamic. I'm going to try something now just to see if it works because I haven't done a whole lot of the share screen stuff. I was just going to show you guys what I posted. This is specific to OCW as far as really understanding where we're at with the journey. I don't know if you guys can see this or not. If you can't, it's the OCW post I made. You can also view it from the Dubois Twitter or X, of course, now it's called. But it says, "Hey Outcast, a lot of you know me from PWV or WGWF. I have been in a lot of shows recently helping Paige with eFed feedback, like on his Twitch as well and YouTube and all of that on shows for his Fed, and have gotten tons of feedback for more, including but not limited to specific role plays, coding like BBC and HTML, layouts like Google Docs or the boards, story, trash, character, ideas, journey evolution, how to do graphics, which programs to use, show or angle feedback, create established characters, and much more upon request." So it's important to understand that I do not run the Fed, so nothing I say is going to be necessarily something that you're judged by as you're writing there. That those questions and concerns should still go directly to the people who run the Fed. So that's not really something that I have anything to do with. So hopefully that worked and you could actually see that. If not, then you just heard me talking and reviewing it. That's fine too. So I think all of that stuff is really important as you go into writing and as you go into trying to figure out how to do things. And I'm just here to try to be a resource to help that thing, to help those things along. I got a lot of feedback in WGWF, and I used to do an eFed podcast with a guy named Dan Ness that started eFed Central, which originally I think was on Facebook and a few other mediums. And we used to do a podcast too, talking about the tenets of e-fetting and what's good and what's not and all that kind of stuff. And I never really kept it going, but I figured, in this way, all the people that have been asking me lately for feedback on work and all this gives us another outlet to do that that's independent of WGWF, and that way it also includes other feds, so that I can help with anything else that you may need when I have time to do it. Won't be every day, won't be all the time, but if you want to, then you go to that post. It's also available on my Twitter. It's on there for the Dubois Twitter, and go on there, and it has a direct link to OCW where you can post the links that you want. Like if you have an RP you want feedback on, you can go directly there and post the link, and then I can get back to it and do a feed like this where I can actually give you some real constructive feedback specific to whatever it is that you're doing, which is something that a lot of eFed owners, because of all the different stuff on their plate, don't have time or energy to. I understand. Hey, we all have lives outside of a hobby, so but that's what this is all about. It's to make this hobby thrive and to let it last long into the future, so that all us older guys that are kind of aging out of it at this point, that have been in it since the eFed wars back in the 2000s and the turn of the century and all that, can turn it over to new blood and have them understand how to do it and do it well. If we can help in any way to make that transition, I want to, because I appreciate places like WGWF that put so much time and energy and shows and all this stuff into what they do, so that people have a good solid place that's not super toxic to go, to be able to enjoy the hobby of e-betting. So you guys have anything, just please refer to the Dubois Twitter, the iconic Dubois, just like this feed here is. And this has been the eFed epilogue, and I'll see you guys next time.